What's up guys, Jonny May here and welcome to this week's quick tip where I'm going to teach you the 10 essential steps to get you from playing basic, major, and minor chords to being able to play jazz at a professional level. Now, I get a lot of piano students who come to me and they say, Jonny, I can play my major chords, my minor chords, and I can play my major scales, but where do I go from here? How do I get to that professional level of jazz playing? And so in this quick tip, I'm going to show you what I call the 10 pillars of jazz. These are the 10 steps that you really need to walk through in order to get to that professional level. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, the first step to playing jazz is to learn all 12 of your major scales. The easiest major scale to play is your C major scale, which is all white notes. Now, why is it important to know your major scales to play jazz? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but one of the most important reasons is because most jazz melodies use notes from your major scales. And a great example is Fly Me to the Moon. Okay, look at that melody. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Basically, it's all white notes. These are all notes from your C major scale. Now, if you don't know your major scales, you can learn them in our Level 1 Foundations learning track at the link below. Step number 2 to playing jazz piano is to learn all 12 of your major and your minor chords. So, a C major chord is C, E, and G. And a C minor chord is C, E flat, and G. Now, why is it important to know your major and your minor chords if you're playing jazz? Well, most chords in jazz tunes are built on your major and your minor chords. For example, on Fly Me to the Moon, you can play the entire song using primarily major and minor chords. Now, if you don't know your major and minor chords, you can also learn these in the Level 1 Foundations learning track at the link below. All right, once you've learned all of your major scales, all of your major chords, and all of your minor chords, the third step to playing jazz is to learn your 7th chords. Now, there are 5 types of 7th chords when you're playing jazz. You have what's called a major 7 chord, you have a dominant 7 chord, you have a minor 7 chord, you have a diminished 7 chord, and you have a half diminished 7 chord, okay? So you want to learn these 5 chords in all 12 keys. Now, why is it important to learn your 7th chords when you're playing jazz? Well, guess what? When you open up a fake book and you look at a lead sheet, you're going to see 7th chords about 99% of the time. So you can take the tune Fly Me to the Moon and play the whole tune with 7th chords. Now, if you don't know your 7th chords, you can learn them in our Level 2 Foundations track at the link below. All right, before we move on to step number 4, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. All right, you've learned your major scales, your major and minor chords, and your 7th chords. And now this is where it's really going to start sounding jazzy. Because the next step, step number 4, is to learn your shells and your guide tones in all 12 keys. So a shell is a very simple idea. If you take a 7th chord like this and you remove 1 or 2 notes from the chord, for example, if I remove the 5th from this chord, I now have what's called a chord shell, okay? And these are very, very important in jazz. They're used all the time, and I'll show you in just a minute how to use these chords. But this is called a closed position shell chord because the chord is contained within an octave. You can also have an open position chord shell where you invert these 2 notes, which we call guide tones, and you play them up here, okay? So you want to learn your shells and your guide tones to play jazz. If you want to listen to a famous jazz pianist who used lots of shells in their playing, check out Bud Powell. Now, how are shells and guide tones used on jazz tunes? Well, if you applied your chord shells and guide tones to Fly Me to the Moon, it would sound like this. Now, if you don't know your chord shells and guide tones, you can learn them in our chord shells and guide tones course at the link below. Now, you're swinging and you're sounding great, but you might be thinking, Johnny, I want to add some of those cool jazzy colors to my chords to make them sound more rich and beautiful. And so step number 5 is to learn all of your chord extensions and your chord alterations. So what is a chord extension? Well, if I take a C major 7 chord like this, I can add 3 different chord extensions to this chord. I can add the D, which we call the 9th extension. I can add the F, which I call the 11th chord extension, and I can add the A, which we call the 13th chord extension. And the reason we call it by these numbers is because we count up from the root note C. So if I count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's my 9th extension, 10, 11, 12, 13, okay? So these are the 3 extensions that you can add to your 7th chords. You also need to know your 4 chord alterations. So if I take a 7th chord, like a C7 chord, I can add 4 really cool sounding notes to this chord. I can take that D and flat it to a D flat. We call this the flat 9. I can take that D, which is our 9, and sharp it. This is called a sharp 9. I can take our 11 and sharp it. This is called a sharp 11 or flat 5, you'll see often in jazz. Or I can take my 13, the A, and I can flat it to a flat 13, or sometimes you'll see it written as a sharp 5 in jazz. So these are our 4 chord alterations. And again, you can add chord extensions and chord alterations to your chords to make them sound more interesting. And here's a quick example of how you can add extensions and alterations to a tune like Fly Me to the Moon. Isn't that beautiful? Now, if you want to learn all of your chord extensions and alterations in all 12 keys, plus how to use them in tunes, check out our chord extensions course and our chord alterations course at the link below. All right, step 6 to learning jazz piano is to learn all 12 of your rootless voicing chords. And if you want to sound like Bill Evans, then you really need to know all 12 of your major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7 rootless voicing chords. So what is a rootless voicing? Well, it's actually a pretty simple idea. If I take a 7th chord, like a C7 chord, I can actually play this chord in a more interesting way by adding some chord extensions and removing the root, okay? So check this out. I'm going to add a D, which we call the 9, and I'm going to add the A, which we call the 13, but I'm going to move the A down here, and then I'm going to remove a couple notes. I'm going to remove the 5th, which is very common to do on jazz chords like this, and then I'm also going to remove the C, which we call the root, and now we end up with this really cool crunchy sounding chord. So check this out. We're going to put the C on the bottom and play the rootless voicing on the top, and it sounds so cool, okay? This is called an A voicing, and your A voicing, rootless voicing chords are built on the 3rd of the chord, okay? You can also play your rootless voicings built on the 7th note of the chord by simply inverting the notes up, okay? This is called a B voicing, okay? Now, rootless voicings sound really cool when you're playing jazz. Here's how you would play Fly Me to the Moon with rootless voicings. Does that sound amazing? Now, you can learn all 12 of your major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7 rootless voicings in our rootless voicings course below. All right, you're sounding great. Now you might be thinking, Johnny, this sounds really nice, but you know, I want to harmonize that right hand melody. I want to play some really rich, colorful chords on my melody notes. How do I do that? Well, this is the topic of block chords. And if you want to play jazz piano, you need to know all of your major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7 block chords. This is the block chord sound. such a beautiful sound, and this is the best way to harmonize your melody if you want a really rich sound. So how do block chords work? Well, I can harmonize any of my notes from a C major scale by adding 3 notes in the middle of each of these melody notes. For example, if I wanted a melody note C and my chord was a C major 7, you harmonize it like this. This is your first block chord on the first note of your C major scale, okay? You can harmonize the second note of your C major scale like this. This is a block chord. It's a 5-note chord. We've got the melody on the outside and 3 notes in the middle to harmonize it. And you can do this for any note of your major scale. You can also do this for any note of your minor scale. And you can also do this for any note of your dominant scale. Now this style comes from the pianist George Shearing. He's really famous for playing block chords. You can check him out if you want to listen more to this style, but this is how you apply block chords to Fly Me to the Moon. Now, if you don't know your block chords, you can learn them in all 12 keys in our block chords course at the link below. And if you also want to learn how to walk bass lines just like I did, I'll put a link to our walking bass lines course as well below. All right, you're sounding great on this. Now you might be thinking, Johnny, this sounds really cool, but what if I was playing Fly Me to the Moon with a band? Like what if I had an upright bass player and maybe I wanted to come up the keyboard and harmonize my melody but kind of spread the notes out a little bit more. And so this is step number 8. The next step is to learn your drop 2 chords. And drop 2s sound like this. It's a very, very beautiful sound, and it's a really beautiful way to harmonize your melody. So how do drop 2 chords work? Well, the basic idea is that I can take my block chords, which I just taught you, and I can drop the second note from the top of the chord. So the top note of the chord is called voice 1. This would be voice 2, voice 3, voice 4, and voice 5. So we're going to drop the second voice down to the bottom, and now instead of playing block chords like this, I'm going to drop the second note from the top of each of these chords to the bottom. Doesn't that sound amazing? And so you can do this with your melody, and this sounds especially beautiful if you're playing in a band and you have a bass player walking that bass line. This is how drop 2 chords would sound on Fly Me to the Moon. Such a beautiful sound. Now, if you do not know all of your drop 2 chords, you can learn them in our drop 2 course at the link below. All right, you're sounding great on the drop 2s. Now you might be thinking, Johnny, I love this sound, but you know, I'm really after that 1950s McCoy Tyner sound. McCoy Tyner had this cool sound where he would spread his chords out in 4th intervals. Okay, it's a very, very cool way of harmonizing your melody. So how do quartal voicings work? Well, a quartal voicing is a chord that is spread out in quarters or 4th intervals. So for example, I can take my melody, if I had a melody like this, and I can harmonize it using primarily 4th intervals down the piano. Okay, and so you get this really cool sound on each of these melody notes, all right? So I could harmonize this melody note like this, all 4ths. I could harmonize this melody note, the D, like this, primarily 4th intervals. We do have a 3rd in there. I can harmonize this melody note in primarily 4th intervals. By the way, these are called 6/9 chords, C, 6/9, and then you can harmonize this melody note like this, again, primarily 4th intervals. So how would you apply quartal voicings to Fly Me to the Moon? Well, first of all, you're going to use these voicings if you're playing in a band, if you have an upright bass player walking bass lines. So for this one, we're going to play it with the backing track, which is included along with this lesson. You can download it at the link below. All right, here we go. So a super beautiful sound. If you do not know all of your quartal voicings, you can learn them in our Quartal Voicings course. All right, step number 10, the final step, is to add the coolest harmony notes to your chords. If you're ever listening to a jazz pianist and you hear them playing these really crunchy chords, okay, these are called upper structure triads, and they are the coolest way to harmonize your chords. So what is an upper structure? Well, you can take a dominant 7 chord, like a G7 chord, and you can add a couple notes to this chord to give it this really cool sound. For example, if I add an A sharp to this chord, this is called the sharp 9, and if I add a flat 13 to this chord, that's an E flat, okay? And then I double this G. I'm gonna put this G up here on the top. I have what's called a G7 flat 13 sharp 9 chord. It's an altered dominant chord. These are very common in jazz. But more importantly, if you look at the right hand, I'm playing a simple E flat major triad over a G7 in the left hand, okay? This is called an upper structure triad, and it sounds really cool when you voice it the appropriate way. And there's all kinds of different upper structures that you can use. So they're very, very important if you want to get that really cool crunchy sound when you're playing jazz. So how would you apply upper structures to Fly Me to the Moon? Well, I would do it like this. Okay, Bill Evans was very famous for using these upper structures in his playing. Now, if you don't know all of your upper structure triads and how to use them on chords, you can learn them in our upper structures course at the link below. All right, guys, this concludes this week's quick tip. And what we just did is we just summarized our jazz curriculum over at pianowithjonny.com. And so if you enjoyed this quick tip, I want to encourage you to check out the website. We have over 800 step-by-step lessons in jazz, blues, pop, theory, technique, improvisation. It is the full learning platform for all playing levels. Also, be sure to check out the Piano with Jonny membership. This gives you unlimited access to all of our courses, plus you get to be part of our live monthly events, including our live Q&As, our live workshop lessons. We do student assessments where you can send me a video and I'll give you personalized feedback. We do weekly challenges for our students, student collaborations, and we have a ton of fun. So go check out Piano with Jonny, and I'll see you in the next one.